All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Dimes and Donuts podcast. Deep dive into the BAAD Owners Fantasy League. My name is Garrett.
And I'm Nick.
Today, we have week 8. A lot of action coming off of crazy bye weeks. One of the highest scoring weeks I've ever had. Just jump straight into the dime. Nick, I think you should do the honor of taking quarterback.
Yeah, so dime of the week for quarterbacks is none other than Dak Prescott, coming out of a huge slump for me, being able to put up 30.1 points. I'm very excited about that. I'm not going to lie, I was getting a little nervous when he had kind of a slow start to the season because, a big part of Superflex dominance is having two really strong quarterbacks, and him coming after a slow start got me kind of panicking. So I'm glad to see that he's kind of figuring it all out, getting back in rhythm, and should be hopefully better for me and hopefully continue this throughout the rest of the year.
Agreed. Yeah, no, this is awesome to see Dak up there. People thought he was a bit of a game manager, especially early on. So he might not have put up some flashy numbers, but as you'll see with the wide receiver later, he a very, very good target. Okay, so next we've got Jahmyr Gibbs, who really just burst onto the scene. There were plenty of Jahmyr Gibbs memes floating around, and after them taking him, we figured it'd be a huge lift for any fantasy team. But honestly, this is the first week that really popped off with 29.9.
Yeah, it'll be interesting
for any running back.
Yeah, no, definitely. It'll be interesting to see if he's able to keep up that production once David Montgomery comes back. Obviously, his production's been being limited by the fact that it seems like Dan Campbell over on the Lions just wants to just run it with Monty every single time instead of giving it to Gibbs. But after,
this helps,
this
right?
game.
This is how these things happen, right? Somebody will get hurt, and that gives somebody a chance. And he is taking every opportunity that he has.
100%.
And running with it, literally. Okay, so for wide receiver, we've got CeeDee Lamb, who put up 41. I've got to say, I'm sick and tired of people not saying that CeeDee Lamb is a top 10 receiver in the NFL. It blows my mind.
Who's saying that?
People have been saying that for years, dude.
Oh, wow.
I said it for years.
Crazy.
Now I'm
especially now.
Sitting here oh my God, this season, he's like fringe top 5. And that's hard to say because there are some incredible wide receivers. But yeah, CeeDee Lamb with 41 points, put up incredible numbers, like we said, against the Rams. Him and Dak have really found a connection the last 2 weeks, it looks like. So I would love to see more of it this season. And I'm sure CeeDee's nuts would as well.
Yeah, 100%. And thinking about talking about CeeDee's nuts, he also had the tight end of the week in Trey McBride.
Who?
Yeah, Trey McBride. He's a sophomore tight end for the Cardinals. That's huge because obviously tight ends take a few years to develop, especially in fantasy and, real life and fantasy. And seeing flashes, at the age of 23, that's a good sign that, in a few years, you might not have to be worrying about that tight end spot. Obviously there's a lot of uncertainty in the Cardinals quarterback situation, but, who knows?
Yeah, just 5 yards away from 100, and he actually had a solo tackle as well. So must have tackled somebody off of an interception. But always funny to see the offensive player with defensive stats. All right, so next we've got Kayvon Thibodeau of the Irving Indica putting up 45 points at a massive.
Yeah, no, Thibodeau, absolutely huge game.
3 sacks.
Obviously a super highly touted pass rusher ever since he was drafted. I actually picked him up in the startup draft initially, but traded him away to I don't even know who. I don't think I traded away for the Irving Indica, who has him now. So he must have been being bounced around for a little bit, but finally showing a huge pass rushing presence with the 45 points, exactly what you want out of such a highly touted edge rusher.
Yeah, he played 14 games last year, and he had 4 sacks. Now he has played 8 games this year, and he already has 8.5 sacks. So he is definitely showing those sophomore boost numbers for defensive linemen. Maybe he had to bulk up, get bigger, not entirely too sure. Also, he was a part of the Jonathan Taylor trade. So he's been bouncing around for a while.
Yeah, right. That's right. Yeah, so it looks like I traded him to No Robbins, and then No Robbins traded him off to Irving Indica for Baker Mayfield, which...
Correct. So next we've got the linebacker of the week. That goes to Frankie Lavu of the Castle Rock Rockers. Problem is we didn't play him, so...
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's not looking good. We are not a great coach this year. I think we just got our heads filled with the Coach of the Year trophy, and we just decided to pack it in.
Yes.
But yeah, 36 points for him. He's absolutely incredible. One of the best waiver pickups ever from last season. And yeah, I mean, he just does it consistently every week. Next, we've got Kyle Duggar, the Patriots, and the No Robbins with 32 points.
Yeah, I mean...
Good. It's a DB. You never know when they're going to pop off.
Yeah, DB with a sack and an interception in the same game, as well as 8 tackles. I mean... Whoa, what a productive game, honestly.
Dude was all around the field. All right, cool. So those are the dimes. Let's jump into the donuts, and there are only 2, and they're both mine. So Deshaun Watson apparently is hurt or something. I don't know. Had no idea. So he's out. And then Nick Bolton, they put on IR, which is crazy, which means that he's going to be out for at least 4 weeks, which sucks because he's just been so good. He's just had I don't know, no real history of injury with him, but he's still so young. I hope that this isn't like a thing that continues. But again, both of these just due to poor management, nothing else. Do you want to take us through the matchups real quick?
Yeah, so talking matchups for this week, I mean, the league median was crazy with one of the highest, I remember seeing in recent memory. League median of 309.49 points. This was just a high-scoring week all around for a lot of different teams, and, this first matchup is no exception. With my own team, the Nukes, against the Irving Indica, I was able to put up 321.62 points versus his 318.98. Irving Indica getting a median win, helping them sort of break out from that bottom group of teams that have been kind of floating all around 4 wins and at the bottom of the standings, but not quite enough, unfortunately, to get the double win. So not a huge movement in the standings there. Followed up by the Atlanta Cicadas versus the Dallas Clovers. Atlanta Cicadas on 300 exactly, as the manager liked to point out this week, saying that he deserves an extra win for that. However,
I think he should. I think that's all.
I mean, that as cool as that is, unfortunately, that it's not how that works. So
not even cool enough to get the median.
Not even cool enough to hit the median with 300 points. And the Dallas Clovers take a double loss on 293-point week, which is brutal. Because especially if they would have faced one of these next 2 teams, they would have gotten at least 1 win, with the next grouping, the Trash Fires, at 274.18 points versus your team, the Rockers, at 261.88 points.
Yeah, I mean, it was just, such a week. Having 2 donuts and then having a bench basically outscore your starters. I mean, it was so poor. All I needed was 13 more points. Got ones. So
yeah, and
really
bad
loss. And if that's I will remember week 8 if I miss the playoffs for sure.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's the sort of thing that makes or breaks a season, especially in your position where you're looking for that sort of bubble slot.
Yep.
But moving on to a much different game, much higher scoring. The TD11 Tudgays put up 346.58 points versus the CD's Nuts, who were, in air quotes, only able to put up 323.22 points. Brutal loss for CD's Nuts, but, I feel like they got a few lucky wins early on in the season, and this is just...
Yeah, they did, for sure. Yep. Okay, and then rounding us out, we have Point Break with 294, just like the Clovers. Not enough to get even a median, which is really, really tough. However, they did put up a lot of points. Good for them. Hopefully that trend continues. But no Robin. This is my surprise of the season. 377.74. It's brutal. It's I think AJ Brown is a huge part of this. I mean, he's got I think it's now 6 games with more than 125 yards in a row. No player has ever done that more than 4 times. And the list is all Hall of Famers. So he's on an absolute tear. And I mean, the rest of his team is just so good this year. It's incredible.
Well, yeah, I mean, just to, we'll hop into the power rankings a little bit, of course, and talk about it a little bit more. But it's interesting that you bring up that A.J. Brown point, because I have some things to say on that soon. But
way to foreshadow. All right, so let's just jump into the standings first. So at the top of the standings, we have the Plano Nuke, 4 wins in a row, now at 12-4. A little dicey there, but really brought it back. Next, we've got the TD11 Tudgays at 11-5, Robbins at 11-5, and CD's Nuts at 11-5. So a 3-way tie for second. Tiebreakers only being points for right now. And next, we've got the Trash Fires at 10-6, sitting comfortably in that 5 spot. Our only 500 team is the Atlanta Cicadas, and then every losing team, starting with the Irving Indica, 5-11, and then we have a 3-way tie for 8th with the Castle Rock Rockers, Point Break FC, and Dallas Clovers all sitting at 4-12. With Point Break losing their last 8 in a row, Clovers losing 7 in a row, and the Rockers losing 5 in a row. So, not great.
No. I mean, it's kind of insane this year. I feel like last year it was really coming down to the wire which teams were going to make the playoffs and which weren't. But at least at this point in the season, and there's still time for it to get switched up, winning streaks to happen, losing streaks to happen.
Dude, it's hard. Like, I mean, there's a clear split. I mean, there's a 3-game split between 6th and 7th place right now for that playoff spot. So the gap is only going to widen, I think. But yeah, I mean, I guess there is still time, but we're also halfway through the season. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Which, with that, let's hop into the almost, basically. It's weird because it's, because fantasy 16 weeks, this is the halfway point now. After this week. So let's hop into the halfway through the season power rankings. Big milestone.
Huge.
So you want to go ahead and take the top few teams, start talking through them, your thoughts?
For sure. Really, we don't have a bunch of crazy movement, so I think I'm going to start with the bottom and then go up.
Okay.
So at 10, we still have the Dallas Clovers. I know they were at 9 last week, but even after putting up 200 points, I still think the Clovers, roster-wise, this is in the standings, are still the worst team, in my opinion.
Okay.
And then at 9, we have the Castle Rock Rockers. I think it's the lowest we've ever been. We're not in a good spot right now, Nick.
Yeah.
We've got a
early preseason favorites.
Yeah, preseason favorites to 9th. I mean, it's just, it's the hope that kills you. And it's the expectations that really put the pressure on. And yeah, being at 9, not a fan. Our quarterback room consists of Deshaun Watson, Matthew Stafford, who's dying more and more every week. He gets sacked like 6 times a game. He's just old. And our last quarterback is Daniel Jones, who is also hurt. So that's not great.
Kind of in arguably shaky.
All 3 of them are in all 3 of them might not be quarterbacks for their teams next year.
Well, Daniel Jones definitely. He just signed an extension. Yeah. But he could be traded.
They could trade him. That's what I'm saying. It's just, I don't know. It's worrisome. It's worrisome. So next we've got Point Break. They're going to stay at 8. I do think that on the flip side, they've got one of the best quarterback rooms and a lot of talent. I do think that they can flip it around. And then at 7, we've got the Irving Indica, who had a huge bounce back week this week, and proved that they still do have a lot of recognizable fantasy talent. And if anybody's going to make it into that 6th spot, it could be them. Do you want to take us through the top 6?
Yeah, so yeah, definitely. So looking at Atlanta Cicadas sitting at 8-8, that's that old Dallas Cowboys, St. Louis Rams special right there. Throwback.
Right, keeps it interesting.
But yeah, 8-8. I mean, and I think that perfectly describes his team. power-wise. I mean, it's very middle of the road. There's no one crazy exciting. But on the flip side, his team's weird. He's got super stacked talent in certain roles. I mean, I don't want to say he doesn't have anyone crazy exciting. I mean, he has T.J. Watt, right? Mark Andrews, Alvin Kamara, Saquon Barkley, Vontae Adams, huge names, right? But they're not doing their crazy stuff right now. And I think that's been kind of hurting him because not all of them are popping off consistently. It'll be like one or two of them have a normal week, and then the rest are just really struggling. Added with all of the injuries that the Cicadas are dealing with, I think he's kind of in a weird spot in which his team seems like they should be really good, but I don't know. It's just not playing out quite that way. So I think 6 is perfect in the power rankings for him, as well as his standings of 8 and 8. And then the Trash Fires are also kind of, in my opinion, both of these two teams are in like that weird middling position, in which I don't know what's going on with them. Last year, I think that they consistently performed very, very well, even outdoing what their roster talent would seem to say. But they've been a middling, low-end playoff team to me this year, and I'm curious to see what ends up happening. I have no doubt in my mind that the Trash Fires are going to make the playoffs. I'm very confident about that, but I'm going to be curious to see how far they end up actually going in there. Which takes us out of the 5 and 6 slot and brings us to the top 4, in which I think things get very interesting here. I think all of these top 4 teams are very, very close, neck and neck.
I cannot wait to see who actually gets these bye weeks. That is going to decide so much.
Yeah, because I think that I don't want to. I mean, I don't want to face any of the other teams in the top 4. They're spooky teams, and I think that starting at 4 is CD's nuts. Looking at them, they have a great roster. Last year, I think my biggest concern looking at them was, okay, their roster's good, but they're aging. They're going to have issues moving forward. And he decided to then go and get a bunch of young talent that's doing pretty well. And I mean, Trey McBride earlier, that dime, right, is a perfect example of it.
It's a huge move, yeah.
So, I don't know. I mean, it's a great team that we put pretty low in the preseason power rankings, but midway through the year, he has been outperforming expectations, and at this point, it's no longer a fluke.
It is clear that they are there for a reason. They belong to be there. Yep.
Yeah, and then going into the
I would like to point out, though, first, before we move on.
Okay.
So the only thing that separates the top 4 for me right now, numbers-wise, is just the points for. So as we go through the top 3, you'll see that their points for right now, very similar. Like, all separated by, like, less than 40 points.
Right.
Whereas with CD's Nuts, they're 150 points behind the top 3 in terms of like what they've scored this year. Now we played a lot of games, so it doesn't really matter. But just the only thing that really separates them, in my opinion.
No, and I think that that does matter, and at a certain point, that will come up, and that will be an issue for them, especially when you look at things like max points for, which, max points for don't win you games, but they sure do make it easier to do so because it removes a lot of the variability and luck requirement, right?
And tiebreakers. You got to think about tiebreakers when we only have so many games in the season, and right now, clear, 3 of the top 4 are tied. So it's like, how are we going to sort that out at the year? So,
and I mean, to your point, when you in the points for, he's 150 behind. Max points for, 300 behind the top 3.
Yeah.
So I don't know. We'll see how that ends up playing out. But I think he's out of the top 4, definitely the solid 4 option. Yeah.
All right. So coming into number 3, we got No Robbins, which, I have to eat a lot of crow on No Robbins. I thought that they had too much dependence on the Eagles. I didn't think that their defense was that good. I was wrong. Very wrong.
Yeah. That's kind of what I was alluding to earlier, which is early on we were talking, oh my gosh, there's so much on the Eagles that's going to hurt you. It turns out that if you have a ton of talent stacked all together, quarterback, wide receiver, running back on one of the best fantasy offenses in the NFL, it turns out pretty good for you. And seriously, I think that at this point, there's a very strong case to be made, as well as with any of the top three, like we kind of alluded to. He could be in some people's number one power ranked slot at this point, which is a massive jump up from 9 in the preseason.
I think it's incredible. In turning this team around, again, it was a mid-season acquisition last year.
Yep.
New ownership came in, made a lot of moves, and yeah, it's pretty impressive to see. Next, we've got the usual suspects. TD Levin Tudgaze and the Plano Nuke take up our top spot. And now we just have to decide where they go, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's tough because obviously I'm in there. I think it's hard to, criticize your team without bias. Mm-hmm. I do think that TD Levin Tudgaze do have a slight edge over me. Despite what the record may say, it does say that the Plano Nukes are in the first place in the standings. But power-wise, I don't know. I think that consistently both TD Levin Tudgaze and No Robbins have put up higher points. I think that they are consistently
barely
100%.
Right, it's so close that it just doesn't matter.
Yeah,
and I think when you talk about, like, again, for me, it's reliance. The difference between you and the Tudgaze and No Robbins is that the Tudgaze and No Robbins have the two best receivers in football right now that are both in literal MVP conversations in A.J. Brown and Tyreek Hill. And I think that it's great if you can guarantee having a 40 to 45 point wide receiver like every single week. That's awesome. But I think you're able to do it in different ways and you're able to spread it around more. So I don't know. Like, for now, I'll agree and I'll put the Tudgaze at 1 and the Nukes below, but I don't think the gap is that wide, like, at all.
No, and to that point, I do think that is actually fair. And one thing that I think got me through the playoffs last year, which is just the depth and to be able to put in next man up. And if I lose a single player, I don't rely. I mean, my team.
Your season's not over. Exactly.
Doesn't rely on us there. So that's fair. That's a good point.
Well, cool. So yeah, those are the power rankings. We'll go over them one more time. So it's the Clovers, Point Break, Castle Rock, Irving Indica, Atlantis Cicadas, Trash Fire, CD's Nuts, No Robbins, Plano Nukes, TD Levin Tudgaze.
Awesome. Well, you usually ask me this question, but this week let's ask you this question. Do you have any last words for our viewers or listeners?
Yeah. My last words are set your lineup every week.